Hey, it's Bret Easton Ellis. Thanks for downloading the podcast at podcast1.com. We'll be starting the show in just a few moments. Not all meetings can be planned in advance. Things come up, last-minute opportunities, work emergencies, new ideas to discuss. But with people working from different offices or on the go, it can be impossible to get everyone in the same room when you need to meet. So be prepared and use GoToMeeting, a powerfully simple way to meet and collaborate online whenever you need to and wherever you are. We even use it on this very podcast. When I talked to one of my guests, Chuck Klosterman, he was in New York and I was in LA, and thanks to GoToMeeting, it was like he was right here in the studio with me. It was awesome. So sign up for GoToMeeting from your computer or mobile device and launch your first meeting in seconds. Share your screen to collaborate on documents, spreadsheets, and projects in real time. And turn on your webcam to see each other face to face. GoToMeeting can save you time and money, and it lets you work smarter. So start your free 30-day trial of GoToMeeting today. Visit GoToMeeting.com, click the Try It Free button, and use the promo code BRET. That's B-R-E-T. That's GoToMeeting.com, promo code BRET. Meeting is believing.
The following program is a podcast1.com production. This is the Bret Easton Ellis Podcast.
You float into the room, a ruffled feather, a hint of your perfume is a comely tether. Give back my heart you stole, chase down the rabbit hole.
This is Bret Easton Ellis, and I'm here with Brandon Boyd today, the lead singer of Incubus, and most recently of a terrific solo side project called Sons of the Sea. And he has, over the last month or so, become the most controversial guest I've considered having on the Bret Easton Ellis podcast. Actually, I should clarify that by saying the most divisive. When my producer, Adam Thompson, and myself started to talk about the possibility of having Brandon Boyd on as a guest, I would mention it to friends of mine. And as a man of a certain age, I had known about Incubus in terms of knowing the hit singles and the videos, but I was never fully immersed in their music. But my boyfriend, who, like Brandon, had grown up in Calabasas and is a musician himself, knew all of their music and is a huge fan, as is another friend of mine who, when I mentioned Brandon Boyd, lit up and said, "If you have Brandon Boyd on your podcast, I will finally listen to it now." On the other hand, many of my friends are, in one way or another, hipster music snobs, and that they all knew who Brandon Boyd was. They couldn't understand, after having Kanye, Marilyn Manson, and Matt Berninger from The National on the podcast, why would I have Brandon Boyd on? What's the connection? Where's all that pain, all that morose anger, all that paranoid despair? Well, I really don't know what the connection is. I mean, what's the connection between Matt Berninger from The National and Marilyn Manson? Except that I find them interesting. And my music snob friends would talk about how much Incubus bothered them to some degree, too commercial maybe, too successful, too multi-platinum, maybe too lightweight, maybe trying too hard. Well, maybe because I'm a musician as well, I never really felt that way about Incubus and Brandon Boyd. As someone who was also a musician and was in bands in high school and college, I'm pretty unsnobby about music. And my taste can run the gamut from Taylor Swift's Red record to James Blake to Tame Impala to Miley Cyrus singing The Climb, to Kurt Weill, to Matchbox 20 singles, to Clout Nothings or the Japan Droids. And I can be interested in musicians as much for their personality and what they represent as much as their music. Well, I like Brandon Boyd's music, and I love his new Sons of the Sea record. Maybe not in the same way that I had a love affair with The National or with The Replacements, but what has always interested me about Brandon Boyd is something rarer that resides in rock and pop music, and that's having a kind of positivity, a serenity, a way of deflating cynicism, not letting irony enter into the picture and have it wreck things to a degree. Though I do think there is something interesting about how an artist can create their work from the massive pain and anger and ego that they carry with them. I think there's also something interesting about people who just like to create. Not everything terrific comes from anger and pain. You can be relatively zen, chill, whatever, and make music that moves people. And Brandon Boyd does, to me, present a version of the artist as someone who is relatively centered, and as someone who has read his published journals, almost Buddhistic in his dealings with the world. There's an openness, something, well, yes, almost earnest in the presentation and approach. And I thought this was even true of the rebellious attitude of Incubus to a degree. Smart, not particularly that tortured, amiable. I find this package interesting, but am I completely wrong? Does pain and anger and sadness always inform the process, or is the process about something else? Do you need positive energy to create, or do you just believe solely in artistic self-expression? And does it matter what anyone else thinks? And I'm not talking about the input from a band and the collaborative dynamics of a band. I'm just wondering where your process comes from. And I think I was just wondering while thinking about Brandon Boyd this past month or so, what is his secret? Hi, Brandon.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast. I didn't know what you would make of any of that, my ramblings about you and what your process is. I've read a lot about you, and I've been aware of you for many, many years. But I was just interested to actually sit down with you and have this conversation about what it means for you to be, I don't know, someone who creates content, I guess, a musician. And where does that come from? And where has it always come from? And has it changed as you've gotten older? And is that, have I misrepresented it in this opening?
I don't think so at all. I mean, it's obviously going to be pretty near impossible for me to have an accurate understanding of how I am perceived, but in my sort of vague attempts over the years, some of the things you just said are kind of close to what I assumed. That I've always assumed that there was a sort of more precious element in the music and the art world that probably didn't look upon myself or my band very fondly. There was like an awareness, but I've always sort of generally assumed that we were never a quote-unquote cool band, or I was never a cool artist. But then, I'd have to be completely blind not to see that there are lots of people around the world over many years who really enjoy what I do and what we do as a band. And so it's been interesting. There was a time when I struggled with trying to understand how I was perceived in the general public. It's a weird situation, as I'm sure you can relate to in a number of ways, to do what you do in an artistic sense and then put it out there, and then lo and behold, it succeeds, and a lot of people read it or listen to it or watch it or something. It poses a sort of almost like an existential dilemma that you're not really counting on. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or any number of dilemmas. So after actually quite a few years of sort of toiling over it, I'm not cool. I'll probably never be cool. Damn it. You always want to, you want to be cool growing up, and you do all these things to try and be cool. And then at a certain point, I think probably, I don't know, in my mid to late 20s, I'm in my late 30s now, I stopped really sort of caring about being cool. And it was like this sounds really ridiculous talking about this, I apologize, but in reference to what you're saying, it was like this, it was like a weight was taken off my shoulders. It was sort of this incredibly liberating moment where for a brief second, I saw all the things that I was not.
Yes.
And in our process of learning about ourselves as we grow up and as we, evolve, in our process, whether it's an artistic process or just, your life, I think one of the ways we find out who we are is by actually observing who we are not and what we are not. And so I began to understand that I just love to make things. I love to draw. I love to make music. I love the feeling that happens when I'm in the process of doing these things. Yes. And it's actually more rewarding to be involved in the process than it is to actually have a sort of end result. The end result is actually kind of bittersweet. Yes. And sometimes I find myself even delaying the end result, just because there's so much, for want of a better term, there's so much joy involved in just exploring around and having the freedom to just explore and, ooh, what does this sound do? And what does this color create? And sometimes you get to put the two things together, and it's, even more fun. So back to your original question, I think that there are a lot of that in there I can actually relate to. And what's interesting is I actually listen to a lot of those bands you were talking about. I like a lot of sort of tortured music.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my favorite music I grew up on would be considered like it could have been written in the pangs of despair. And a lot of the music that I write is written in those states too. I think I'm wired perhaps optimistically, even though I go through many of the same experiences that most people do in dealing with depression occasionally, and terrible circumstances that might get thrown at you. And I just have this wiring in me that knows that there's hope, like no matter what. And I know that's kind of quote unquote uncool. It's cooler to be like, ugh.
I think it's great, and I wish I had it. And, talking about that whole cool thing, there's such a limitation to the cool thing, because I remember when I first started publishing, I was only considered cool. I really wasn't considered literary by the gatekeepers of the literary community, and I wasn't taken seriously at all by them. And all I had was a kind of cool cred, which, sold books, of course, but never was, got awards, was never taken particularly serious by the big, critics. So I guess maybe because I'm wired a different way, I didn't care. I just kind of didn't care.
That's a real blessing too, that you had that to begin with.
Well, yeah, it's a blessing that I didn't care about that, but it also was tied into a kind of I wouldn't call it a depression, but a kind of despair that I had anyway, a kind of free-floating despair. That is, of course, part of why I think I became a writer. Yeah. It was part of why I wanted to sort out these feelings. It's kind of a win-lose situation. It's kind of, okay, well, yeah, I don't let that bother me. Yeah. I already have the armor to create what I want to create without letting people's reaction toward it or distract me from what I want to do. But I think it goes back to how you're raised in a certain way. And I know that you were born in California like myself, and I lived in Sherman Oaks and graduated from the Buckley School. And you were born in Van Nuys, and you graduated from Calabasas High in 1994. So, like me, you had a Los Angeles childhood. Well, different times. As you said, you're about at least 10 years younger than me. So that Los Angeles childhood. Well, Calabasas is now much more like the rest of LA than it was then. And I don't think it was as known for having the Kardashians live there and reality shows filmed there and Justin Bieber living there and it constantly being on TMZ, 24/7.
Those people live there now?
Yeah, they do live there.
Wow.
Do your parents still live there?
They do, yeah. Yeah. Calabasas, I feel like I kind of like escaped Calabasas, though I still have a soft spot in my heart for it because I grew up there, but I knew I never wanted to stay.
Tell me why. What was it like? I mean, look, I have friends who grew up in Calabasas, and I guess there's a similar feeling of. But what is it? What is the feeling of Calabasas? Because it's now so kind of known in the world. Yeah. But what was it like in the 80s and 90s, early 90s?
I mean,
late 80s.
I can't complain about it. I have to say that it was far more undeveloped. Obviously, it was a lot more. There were none of those sort of beautiful outdoor malls that are there now, and it was more just rural. And the house I grew up in was just sort of, it was almost like we were in the country, even though it's just sort of a glorified suburb of Los Angeles. But I grew up sort of trudging through the hills with my brothers and catching snakes and collecting bugs, and then when I was young, I started to surf. So that was really the greatest part, was its proximity to the water. It was close to the water.
Everyone who doesn't know, Calabasas is in the western hills of the San Fernando Valley, and it's really just over
the hill from Malibu.
From Malibu, yeah. So there is a lot of you have easy access to the beach.
Yeah, and so in those ways, it was a real blessing. It was really a nice place to grow up. All that being said, that there was, for me growing up, there was a real kind of darkness in Calabasas, which in certain ways was inspiring for any young artist, I'm sure it would be. But it also created this impetus in me to want to live someplace else. There was an incredible sense of entitlement that I sensed from the people in that area, which just felt strange. But there was also this incredible sort of drug problem. Or I don't know if it was a problem for them. There was just access to just drugs, but not just pot. I mean, we could get good pot there, which was fun, but there was like crack, and there was speed, and there was heroin, and all these kind of like illicit drugs you would hear about from the inner city or something, but they were just smack dab in Calabasas, like in the parking lot of Calabasas High School. And it was, I didn't do those kinds of drugs growing up, so it was shocking to me. It was like, what is this? Like, it was weird. There was this strange, like I said, there's almost like this darkness about it. Like it was trying to self-sabotage. It was aware of it. It was sort of bordering on being a rich suburb and too nice. So somehow it had to like deprecate itself. You know what I mean? Like it was strange. It was a really weird energy. So I did my best to throw myself into music. And, we started Incubus when we were in 10th grade, so we were about 15 years old. In a lot of ways sort of kept, my three buddies that I grew up with, we started the band together, kept us out of some of those darker realms of Calabasas. It sounds so funny, like, to talk about it that way, because most of us know Calabasas as it is today. And I guess in certain ways it wasn't terribly different. It was just less developed. But like any kind of a thick drug atmosphere, illicit drug atmosphere, has with it like this darkness. It's like people are trying to escape something. Right. And to look at it, it's like, what are you trying to escape? This place is beautiful. It's next to the beach. You're in the hills, I can't actually tell you exactly what it was that everyone's trying to get away from there.
Well, it's interesting. Just growing up in Los Angeles, you're in a fairly beautiful environment, very idyllic. There's the beach, there's the hillsides, there's the canyons, there's the deserts, and yet within this world, there was also, for me growing up, a ton of drugs and easy access to drugs. But I think the difference between the late 80s drug use and the early 80s drug use that I was going through was that the Just Say No era really hadn't quite happened. And the idea of the demonization of drugs really hadn't begun to accrue yet. It was still considered kind of cool. We really didn't know anyone who overdosed. Rehab? What the hell was rehab? We didn't even know that was a thing that happened. You just partied, kind of. Right. But it's still, even for me, and when I began to write Less Than Zero, I did begin to see a more insidious effect that drugs had. And it's heightened by the fact that we are in this kind of beautiful, semi-rural atmosphere, and there's so much beauty around us that's so tactile, and yet still wasted kids. Now, as an artist, I love that the dichotomy between the two, and it's inspiring. It's dramatic. It's tense. It's like, it's ironic or whatever, but. Something that you wrote about in your new book, I guess it's your newish book, So the Echo.
Yeah, which came out just a few months ago,
your third book, which is a collection of sketches and watercolors, photographs, and most interestingly, these musings, or journal entries almost, I saw them as. You wrote about high school and that you knew you were considered good-looking and that the take on good-looking kids was, quote-unquote, good-looking kids aren't smart. They don't need to be. And that you, quote-unquote, understood early on that the way I appeared would hinder me as much as it would help me. And I guess the hindering would be that people are blinded by good looks and they don't bother or they don't care to look much past the surface of things. But if you're smart, as you were in high school, and good-looking, I would imagine this would either make you cynical and suspicious about the world and its desires, or, just fuck it. You could have a really good time, a great deal of fun. Do you think in terms of hindering you, it altered in any way how some people reacted to Incubus and the band by having such a good-looking frontman? I mean, I know you did have – there was a certain kind of critical acclaim, But did you ever think that you weren't being taken more seriously by the rock press because of how you looked? And I also thought it was very interesting when you wrote about how you kind of rebelled against that notion of being a good-looking kid, and how you dealt with it was interesting. If you want to talk about it.
Sure. You know, that journal entry is essentially what it was. I was sort of writing to myself as we do in our journals, and it wasn't necessarily intended on being something that I shared. And then as I was going through all these different journal entries and, you know, pictures and drawings and things to amass what became this latest book, that entry in particular was the one that I kind of toiled over the most, really, as to if it was appropriate to share. It felt it made me feel very vulnerable that I had sort of made those observations.
But that's why it's so powerful, because it is so vulnerable, and that's why it works, and that's why it kind of popped out for me. Like, he's being incredibly vulnerable and honest about something that a lot of people might just think is whatever, a kind of humble brag or whatever, but it's really not. I mean, because you go on to say how you dealt with this notion of, you know, of being handsome in a way. It
is a complex one. I think that we're sort of genetically wired to really sort of presuppose that beauty equals goodness. You know what I mean? Like, we have this sort of this magnetic attraction to well, speaking from, you know, like the heterosexual male point of view, it's like you see a beautiful woman, you're like, she must be good. I'm going to go to her for directions, or, you know what I mean? She knows. And then you learn very quickly, I think especially in a place like Los Angeles, an environment like this, that it is a really just cleverly crafted illusion. It's one of the most sort of almost devious illusion that nature has to offer, that beauty equals goodness. It is not the case. There are a lot of beautiful people in the world who that is their one basket that they've thrown all the sort of proverbial eggs into. That is the one. And it's a fool's errand. It comes crashing down sooner than later. I think that you probably spend most of your life in that sort of decay process. We peak very early as human beings, and then we sort of are fighting it back the rest of our adult lives. And there was a part of me, I think, that kind of saw that for some reason, and I knew that maybe in certain ways this was an interesting blessing to have these sort of like this genetic thing that people like wanted to smile at and like, here, come over here, you know, and like invite me into things. But I also I saw it in a kind of balanced sense for also where it would wear itself out, where it could overstay its welcome. And I really sensed that too with what you're talking about with Incubus, and when we kind of worked our way into the spotlight, you know, any number of times for, you know, whether brief or long. There were moments when I felt it hindering us. I felt people, they would just see it and they would like it because of the way that it looked, and then they wouldn't invest any more energy into it because of that. So that was a little bit difficult, but I think actually even that was a blessing in disguise, because for me as a writer, as a songwriter, it reminded me of the part that's really important. It's like you need to dig, you need to go and like go mine your soul for these things, for these songs. And this is not something you can hang your hat on. You know, there are little moments where, you know, you can play with it, and that's fun and cool, but you can't take it that seriously because it does not last. You know,
it's just so strange. I mean, I guess it's not so strange, but as you get older, and you might just find it more amusing than perhaps when it was happening. The idea that people might take a band less seriously, despite what they're singing about, because of the way their lead singer looks. And you were really, you know, Incubus was really popular in a time where the lead singer wasn't necessarily, you know, kind of a really good-looking guy. There was a shift in kind of the alternative culture where, you know, there was kind of a reaction against that in a way. And if you just get that, you know, DNA genetic lottery winner, you're automatically kind of branded. I thought it was interesting reading your book how you dealt with it in high school, where you said you decided to grow your hair out long, and you decided to grow a beard. You almost kind of camouflaging yourself, that you decided to drive a car that was kind of, I guess, a beat up car in a way, and you did all of these things that went against the grain of being the good-looking high school kid in terms of becoming automatically, because of your looks, Mr. Popularity or whatever.
Right.
So I thought it was just a conscious decision to kind of react against a kind of conformity in a way. It was a reaction against a kind of conformity, which, let's go back to Calabasas, I would assume was a very conformist kind of mini society in this semi-rural area of Los Angeles.
Well, even at Calabasas High, many of the kids were, for their 16th birthday, they got a BMW or a Mercedes. It was an interesting environment like that, and so that wasn't an option for me and my family. So there was a part of it that was just plain old reality. Like, I could only afford to spend $1,000 on a car, and I think that even if my father could afford to have bought me that car, I don't think he would have. And I'm really glad that he's of that mindset, because I think it is a sort of vast distortion of reality, especially so young. So what I did, I think, was just embrace those sort of juxtaposing elements in my childhood, and kind of in an adolescent way. It was sort of an adolescent decision to stop washing my hair and stop shaving and embrace my shitty car. There are obviously more kind of adult ways we could juxtapose certain things in this day and age, but for me then, that was the only, we have limited power when we're young, and that was the only way that I felt like I could empower this thing and kind of balance some of those things that we're talking about. It's funny, it's a strange thing for me to even talk about out loud, because there's a part of me that feels, it still makes me feel vulnerable talking about it, because it feels like it's hinged in some form of conceit. But I know for me it's not. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to just look at it, at it for what it is. You don't have to,
But
it's just a strange one, as you can tell, just in my reticence.
But that's good. I mean, that vulnerability is good, and it's good too. I think. I mean, not enough people really go there, I think, now in the culture in terms of talking about things like that. I mean, for some reason, yes, I understand. I mean, I wanted to bring it up because it is kind of taboo in a way, but I don't think it should be. It might put you in kind of an uncomfortable place, but I was talking, I guess, last week with the comedian Michael Ian Black, and we were doing the podcast here at Podcast One, and we both admitted about 20 minutes into it, because we were having a sincere discussion. No irony. He was not going to do his shtick. We were going to talk seriously about culture. What are the lines with comedy? Where do you draw the line in terms of topics or whatever? And suddenly he said, I'm really stressed because we're having a sincere conversation. And I guess sincerity right now is kind of radical in this moment of, irony and people not really talking to each other, dealing with each other via social media or whatever. But yes, that kind of vulnerability is – what I like about it is that it's authentic. It's real. And that's really – the more, we delve into this world of avatars and social media, what I am looking for, no matter what it is, I'm looking for authenticity. That's what I want. And if that's kind of what it's like, fine. I mean, it's just – that's realness.
I think that what you're touching on is something that perhaps is the most important aspect of being a human being, that is perhaps getting kind of like chipped away at, and has been for some time, but like with our forms of new media, and even though I use them and they're enjoyable and all these things, I kind of understand what's happening almost in a neurological sense. Like, we are chipping away at the potential for authenticity and sincerity every time. And so it's also why I like to hold music and art in such high regard, is because therein lies that opportunity to remain sincere, for it to be a direct channel from our innermost struggles, our innermost hopes, joys, love, hate, all of it. You know what I mean? Like, that to me, it's really the highest calling, because of its potential to keep that, to keep sincerity, to mirror sincerity in us. And it's difficult, once again, and especially in an environment like Los Angeles, even though I choose to live here.
As do I.
It is one of the least sincere environments that I can imagine.
Maybe that's why I'm so hungry for authenticity, because I've lived here now for like 8 years, and I'm like, and so whenever I see a shred of vulnerability or someone being authentic, I kind of leap on it and want to talk about it.
The Bret Easton Ellis Podcast at podcastone.com.
Do you want to get your life organized and start a business? Well, you can quickly do both at LegalZoom.com. Getting your life organized starts with drafting a last will and testament or a living trust from LegalZoom. You'll protect your assets, your family, and get peace of mind. If you're starting a business, LegalZoom can help you with that as well and save you a ton of time and money. LegalZoom has helped start over 1 million businesses. LegalZoom's step-by-step process was created by a team of experts in law and technology. LegalZoom is not a law firm, but can connect you with a third-party attorney and provides you with self-help services. For special savings, enter Bret, that's B-R-E-T, in the referral box at checkout. Please don't let another month go by before you take care of these things for your family and business. From wills to business formation, trademark applications, powers of attorney, and even bankruptcy help, go to LegalZoom.com. Valentine's Day is coming up, and let's face it, sending online flowers kind of sucks. You always get burned. $19.99 somehow becomes $74.50, and what shows up isn't what you ordered, and it's mostly dead, and then you get spammed for the rest of your life. So this is why the Books.com was started. That's THEBOUQS.com. Books, because they took the word bouquets and simplified it. The Books.com sends flowers straight from sustainable farms on an active volcano in South America. Yes, I'm serious. They come straight from a sustainable farm on an active volcano in South America, and they charge a flat rate of just $40 with free delivery. So your loved one gets beautiful flowers and you save cash. To get ready for Valentine's Day, thebooks.com is offering 25% off when you enter code BRET, B-R-E-T, at checkout. That gets you 2 dozen roses for under $40 or 1 dozen roses for just $30, all with free delivery. So go to thebooks.com. That's THEBOUQS.com. Click on the shop button at the top of the page and send someone you love the freshest, longest-lasting flower bouquet. Don't forget, use code BRET, B-R-E-T, to get 25% off. Thebooks.com.
The Bret Easton Ellis Podcast.
The writing's on the wall. If I can walk, I will crawl. You rise above them all. We come together. We come together. We come together. Well, I think that maybe I've seen too much.
When I was a musician in my late formative years, I guess 16, 17, 18, through my early 20s, that was the time I was most obsessed with listening to the music of the moment, as well as writing music and playing it. But I was also extremely into, at that age, keeping up to date with current bands, both popular and mainstream, as well as those that were obscure. And I was also curious about their influences. I wanted to know what shaped their sensibilities. And I would read about the bands and the performers that I liked, and I would go back and listen to the people who influenced them. So I would be discovering, an early Dylan record that was made before I was born, or Jimi Hendrix, or Dusty Springfield, or listening to Exile on Main Street, which meant nothing to me when I was 8 when it came out, or the Raspberries, or the Sex Pistols, or T-Rex. But I wanted to know what the artists I was responding to had listened to when they were in their formative years. And I discovered a lot, and I learned a lot, and it was fascinating and instructive. Today, I am not sure that really happens to the degree that it did. I mean, I'm not sure that people listening to Daft Punk are automatically going back and listening to 70s disco and soul records.
Right.
And I'm not sure if Giorgio Moroder, and there's a song about him on Random Access Memories, means anything to anyone under 30 now, even though his influence is everywhere with new synth bands. But I guess it's because we're confronted by such an avalanche of content now that we simply that we simply just didn't have then. And even though we have easier access in terms of learning about influences, it's understandable that that really isn't happening now. That's not something that people are wired into doing. There isn't the same kind of interest or reverence for going way back into the past. I mean, when you mention a cultural reference to someone fairly young and they go, I wouldn't know about that. I wasn't born yet. The big line, I wasn't born yet. Why would I know about Montgomery Clift or Orson Welles or whoever? Well, I hadn't been born yet, but I wanted to go back into the past, and I wanted to find out more about these artists, these filmmakers, these musicians. I mean, because, you, like myself, though you're, as I said, you're younger by about a decade, you grew up in mostly an analog era where pop music really didn't feel so disposable by the very nature that there just wasn't as much music available. So it was pretty easy to find stuff. I know you could say it's pretty easy to find stuff on your computer, but I remember, I want to find out that, I want to get that record. I'm just going to go to Tower and go to the bin and pick it up, and most likely they'll have it.
Yeah.
What are your feelings about this? And did you feel the same way? Were you that kind of musician, or what were your influences, and how were you dealing with this whole thing that I'm talking about?
There was. I've always been I've always been highly curious as to what became my favorite artists, like what influenced them. Same with writers as well. I always wanted to reference their references and then reference their references. I've always found that really interesting. You create your own web of sorts.
Yes.
And in a way, you get to. It's as if you're curating your own sort of intellectual content.
Exactly.
And it's a lot of fun to do that. I think you're right. I don't think that is happening as much at all in this day and age, really, since the internet became what we understand of it today. And what's so mind-boggling is that it's really only just got started, too. But what has happened already is this sort of the shallowing effect.
The Shallows.
The Shallows. Was it Nicholas Carr? Is that he wrote that?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of reading it right now. Yeah.
Really interesting book.
I think some people assume that it's an alarmist view of things, and it's kind of a Luddite book, but it's not at all. It's got a very neutral, objective overview of the situation, because I knew a couple of younger people who said, why are you reading that book? Isn't that book so anti-internet? No, not at all. It goes through the process of how it is rewiring our brains, just like the printing press rewired our brains.
Maps.
And just,
clocks, they all did it.
The spoken word moving into the written word altered people's brains thousands of years ago. So, but anyway, yes, The Shallows is.
Well, so we're once again referencing an author's research here, and but I think it's true. I think what is happening is, even though I do celebrate the internet and think it's one of the most amazing intellectual tools we've ever devised.
I agree.
It's so easy to abuse. It's so easy to, without even knowing it, because we're sort of skimming across everything, and our ability to, like he talks about in the book, our ability to delve deeply into any one thing, whether it's an album or an author or a subject, anything like that, it's lessening and lessening every year for us. So each generation going forward, if we continue the way we're doing, is going to be sort of chipping away at that capacity. So. All I can say is that it's a lot of fun to dig around. I would never have been turned on to a composer like John Zorn if I hadn't read the liner notes of my favorite Mr. Bungle record growing up. And then, as a result of listening to John Zorn, I found out about like the Boredoms and all these other sort of like bands that, in some circles, could be considered obscure, and others maybe not. But like for me, I was brought up on what was pop radio in the late 70s and the 80s. So, and that stuff was kind of amazing. Like I listened to Harry Nilsson and Billy Joel and Elton John and the Beach Boys and the Beatles and all these things. And they wouldn't exist. Those bands don't exist today, and no bands like them exist because it was just a different world, different brain space, that there was a different playing field they were operating on. So I may have digressed a little too far. I forgot the nature of your question.
No. But what also is interesting, listen, and this kind of ties back to the pop music of the 70s, to a degree in the 80s, the notion of those songwriters you mentioned, Harry Nilsson, Elton John, Billy Joel, melody. One of the things that I noticed on Sons of the Sea was this not that it wasn't there in Incubus, but this kind of newfound embrace of melody, of hooks, and that's really that's something that I find very pleasurable, and I kind of miss that. Even in a lot of the music that I admire right now, I kind of miss that primal pleasure of a hook, of a great melody line, and I take it so did you to a degree in terms of making this record, which really all 10 tracks are imbued with that.
Thank you for saying so and for noticing those things in the record. I have to say, I've always, since I learned how to sing, I learned to sing on the job. The first couple of Incubus records are sort of devoid of melody. It's a little bit more kind of, I call it barking. I just didn't know how to sing, but I knew it was fun. And I knew that there was some energetic presence when we all got together that was beautiful and infectious, so I wanted to keep doing it. I, like I said, learned on the job about singing and the kinds of ways of singing that were sort of destroying my voice early, and then the ways that it felt more like it was tickling my heart and my head at the same time. And I sort of kept on that path, much to the dismay of our earliest fans. I think they kind of liked this sort of barky, yelly, screaming thing that I used to do, and that was fun, but it was quickly destroying my voice, and I couldn't carry on doing that. So I remember very distinctly when I was like 19 starting to make a decision, like, I'm going to sing more, because it's actually more difficult, it's more of a challenge, and I really feel like there's no ceiling on it. There's no place that you can't go. In melody, it's like a guitar or a piano. You're dealing with a finite amount of your playing field is finite, but there's an infinite number of combinations you can put together to make all these things. So when I started working with Brendan O'Brien, who he produced the last 3 Incubus records, I remember very specifically him and I sat down and before we started working together on the first one we did with him was an Incubus album called A Crow Left of the Murder. And he said to me, so this is going to be fun, we're going to have a good time and looking forward to working with you guys. You guys are great, And he's like, I just want to ask you point blank. He's like, what would you like from me? What would you like me to do? How can I help you in this process? And I asked him to challenge me. I said, don't let me become sort of complacent in what I already know how to do. Like, I would very much like to continue to get better as a singer, as a lyricist, as a songwriter. Challenge me. Like, tell me, no, that's not good enough. And he's like, I can do that. He got this little glimmer in his eye. It's like, he's like, oh, I can do that.
But you really wanted him to.
I really wanted him to. And, I'd been challenged in certain ways with the first couple of producers that we worked with. But it was a little bit more like, no, you're good. Like, keep doing that kind of a thing. And that felt limiting to me because I knew, as a young man, it's like, we don't know everything. You can never know everything. That's why we sort of seek out mentors.
Yes.
And so Brendan early on started acting as a sort of creative mentor musically for me. So we did the 3 Incubus records with him. Each one, he continued to challenge me.
And what were the challenges exactly? What were the things that he would, kind of a macro challenge or sometimes specifics?
Yeah, he would, a lot of the time it was support, which is great. For the most basic kind of challenge would be like, you were just a little bit flat right there. That sounded good, but just do it again. And then, which meant like 13 or 15 or 20 more times. Like, you can do it. One more time, man. You almost got it. And then, because it would be challenging for him too. So that would be the most basic. But then I'd come in with what I thought I was certain it was like, I've done it. I've created the ultimate rock lyric. Here it is. And I would sing it, and he sort of would. One of the things he's really good at is the delivery. It's like, that's cool. I don't get what you're talking about, but I guess that's cool, and we can do that if you want. But he's like, I think I'm starting to understand what you're getting at, but there's got to be a better way you can say it. And then he leaves it at that, and I'm like, oh God. Okay, and there's a part of you that knows he's right. You know that you stopped at a certain point creatively. You were heading down the road and you're like, ooh, I like that. And you grab it. And then there's a part of you that knows you could have taken it a little bit further and maybe it would be better, but you sort of stop. You self-edit in that moment. So that's what he's always done for me. He's like supported me where I needed support and encouraged me where if something was good, he'd be like, that's really good. sing that louder, do that, right? That thing you do that more. But then sometimes to tell me like, no, like you're better than that right there. Which is difficult. So with the Sons of the Sea thing, sorry, I'm giving you the long answer.
No. Obviously, you responded to Brandon, and you liked that collaboration.
Yeah,
okay.
And so we had a very, he was always the producer to Incubus. So with Sons of the Sea, we had mused off and on for quite a few years about writing songs together. And so we worked together for 10 years before we got to the point where we tried to write a song together. And then so we started writing music together before it was called Sons of the Sea. And it was just interesting, like the way that he writes guitar and the way that he composes on piano. It was as if he was giving me space to explore those melodic sensibilities more than I'd ever really known how to. And it was fun. It felt new. It felt like I didn't know what I was doing, which is so much fun if you've been doing it for over 2 decades already, to be sort of like given this opportunity to start again. You know what I mean? So that's what it really felt like.
You talk a lot about pain in So the Echo, and I don't want this to be a particularly depressing podcast, but it does come up with all of my guests. Most of my guests create content, they're directors, they're musicians, and it comes up a lot, this notion of pain, depression, how it's either fueled the work or hindered the work to a degree. And you actually, in So the Echo, talk a lot about pain. And I was kind of surprised that you went there with that, because as we've talked about and as you've admitted, you are wired for hope, more or less, in a way. And I know that's a great thing to have, to be able to move through the world like that. And we're not talking about just everyday depression, everyday sadness or stress, but I am curious, in the life of Brandon Boyd, when were you, at what point in your life were you the most down? At what point were you just most surprised at how you got to this place? And what did you do to kind of get out of it? What was the low point?
Well, I've had a number of low points. I don't know if I can actually isolate the lowest, though I can recall it was in the not too distant past. It was a physical calamity that brought me into sort of an emotional one as well. There was.
Did you touch upon this in So the Echo? Was it kind of in there a little bit?
I may have.
Okay.
Yeah, I got very sick. My body started shutting down in lots of ways, and I didn't know why. And well, I had an Achilles tendon injury about 10 years ago, 11 years ago in October, which is whatever. It's like people sever their Achilles tendon and you get it repaired, and then you take the year physical therapy and blah blah blah, whatever. That's what happened. It was terribly painful, blah blah blah. And then the injury, after 5 years of being okay, my body started to reject the surgery after 5 years. And so my body around that, I basically got like a really horrible infection in my leg, and it sort of kind of went through my whole body and shut me down for like 6 months. And so I was just laying on a couch for like 6 months in terrible physical pain, like all over my body. And then I think that if you're on the couch long enough for any reason, you start to get depressed.
Right.
You can only watch so many movies and read so many books, and before it's like you need some fucking fresh air and get out there. And, So I couldn't do a lot of the sort of physical activities that make me physically happy, like surfing or riding my bicycle or riding a skateboard or something. So I was really left to it created a sort of an existential dilemma, and I was at my lowest point. I was like, am I dying? Like, what's happening to me? And crying a lot and all these terrible things. The way that I got out of it was I just started sitting with my guitar. It sounds really cheesy now. I'm saying it out loud. I apologize.
So be vulnerable.
Yeah,
be vulnerable.
There was the only thing there. My girlfriend was being really wonderful, and she was taking care of me and seeing me at my lowest point, and she still loved me, which was incredible. That was an incredible time. But I've never been a good guitar player as far as guitar playing goes, because I was always in a band with like a guitar prodigy guy. And so I'm still not a good guitar player, but I know the guitar. Like, we have a relationship together, and we have conversations. And so I basically laid there and just wrote a bunch of music. And it was a long-winded process to sort of pull me out of that thing, and my body started to heal, and I started to kind of like see the sunshine a little bit more. And I made a record called The Wild Trapeze. It was actually my first solo record.
Right.
So I was still healing when I went into the forest way upstate in New York with my friend Dave Fridman, and he produced this record. It was just the two of us, and I played all the instruments on the record, and it's kind of crappy, but in like a really sincere way, and like a really good way. It sucks really well. And that's how I like to describe it. And it woke me up to the fact that I had a lot more music in me than I was writing only with Incubus. And I decided to give myself permission to do that because I love being in Incubus. I love this band. I've always loved it. I continue to love it, but there's more there. I feel like that what happened coming out of that period of like physical depression and emotional depression was I decided to give myself permission to like do many things, to have many arms, right. and touch many things, and almost be like sort of like in this polyamorous relationship with creativity. And I don't know if it's good for my career to do these things, but I know in a spiritual sense, in an emotional sense, intellectual sense, it makes me feel like I'm sort of walking with the wind. I'm petting the cat in the right direction. Right. You know what I mean?
Right. But you know what? I mean, I think right now in this day and age, when I hear that kind of concern, which you obviously don't have about being good for a career, you and I guess before we started the podcast, we're talking about, well, why am I doing a podcast? I mean, I get a lot of flack from literary people that I'm kind of all over the place now, that I create content for TV shows, miniseries, independent films, a YouTube channel, a podcast. I think, in a way, James Franco gets a lot of flack for doing all the stuff he does. To me, that kind of seems normal in this new day and age, that you can branch out. You can post anything. You can publish your own books with drawings and journal entries as well as whatever. It's just everything's so wide open. And I don't know the notion of, I think 10 or 15 years ago, you could have that idea of good for your career. I don't know. I think that's kind of been shattered for a lot of us who thought, okay, well, I am a writer, so I need to brand myself as the young novelist. Therefore, that means I do these readings, I go to these towns. When I do a tour, I go there. I don't talk to that part of the press. I don't, there's a kind of, I don't want to say it was a closed, hermetic world that I was in, but a lot of the choices about my movements were based on this rigid idea of being a novelist, pop star, or whatever. I find it to be a huge relief that that kind of pressure is gone, because you can still go back to that to a degree and fool around with that, but it's a much more, I think, open world right now. And so I think, for example, I mean, when I see all the stuff you're doing in terms of photography, in terms of writing, to me, it's beginning to seem more and more natural, seeing everyone kind of break out of that mold.
Yeah. I really feel like there are any number of creative personalities living in all of us. And to me, it's wonderful when you hyper-focus on one thing, when you focus and you become sort of expert level in any one thing. That's beautiful. Yeah. But there's also something amazing about giving yourself license to just like see what happens when you just, open every window in the house and let the breeze come through and just, and all your papers get rustled up into the air. And
it's freedom in a way.
It's freedom, yeah. And I really feel like I always, when I talk about inspiration, or I call her muse, and it's just probably the most easy way to describe it. And that for some reason I call it her. I don't know why. I don't feel like she's like a wild banshee. Like she doesn't want to be just one thing. Like she wants to be. She's many armed. She's like a Hindu deity with like 8 arms, holding different things in each arm, and she wants to smash things and make things. You know what I mean? Like it's more fun that way.
Right. Well, but I do think there is a generation of people who don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I was watching. There was an HBO documentary made about Fran Lebowitz, and one of the things she complains about in this documentary is the lack of connoisseurship, I guess. And I think what she means by that is that people today, because of our kind of attitude, like we should be able to do anything, and I want to explore this, that people are moving away from the fact of being very, very good at one thing and then becoming maybe not so great on a series of other things. And that's a problem for Fran. Now, it's only a problem, I think, if you have that kind of rigid mentality, a kind of what I like to call an empire mentality, where we all are stuck in the empire and we've moved into the post-empire now, the post-empire world that technology helped move us into.
Yeah.
And that has, for some people, felt like a trap. Like, what do you mean you're blogging about this and you're writing a novel too, and you're going to be recording songs with your girlfriend and posting them on Facebook? I'm just talking about on a low level, just like the kid out there who's doing this stuff. So just to remember that there is that mindset as well, that thinks that sense of freedom is kind of watering things down in a way.
And I'm completely willing to admit that she might be right. Maybe it is bad, but I think where I'm at this moment, I think maybe you share in the sentiment is I don't care. Like it
don't care. It ended. The caring. I can't hold that pose anymore. I can't do it. Yeah. And I'm glad I can't. It's great.
It feels good, right? It feels like really a weight's been taken off the shoulders. It's like, oh, you can kind of do anything you want. Come up with it, try it. If it doesn't work, failing is one of the greatest experiences I think that one could ever have. I failed a lot. I'll continue to fail, knock wood. I'm not saying I enjoy it, but I'm saying it's been some of the most educational, creative experiences I've had, is learning how to navigate my way up and out of a vast failure.
Yes.
And you're going to fail more if you try more things. Absolutely going to fail more, but I don't think even failing is necessarily bad.
Exactly.
I think we learn a lot about ourselves in those processes.
I agree, and I think that there was something about growing up in an era where you failed and you learned from it instead of you fail and you got 4 gold stars and a trophy because you just showed up.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting how my much younger friends deal with failure or the idea of failure compared to people of my age who it was just part of life and you just dealt with it. And, a lot of crappy things are going to be happening to you as you get older. It's just not avoidable.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see a younger generation be so sensitive about things that just kind of happen that are just life. They don't really know how to process in a way.
Right.
So anyway, but we also on this podcast like to talk about movies a little bit before we end the show. And I forgot that you had worked with Floria Sigismondi on the Megalomaniac video.
Also a video called Talk Shows on Mute.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah. And I like Floria. We were going to do a project together that kind of didn't come together. And I like her video work. And I really liked her movie, The Runaways, which is, for those of you who don't know it, it's a rock biopic about the early years and the formation of the band The Runaways, primarily focusing on Cherry Curry and Joan Jett. It's pretty tough and no-nonsense movie, but like most music biopics, it can't help but probably sugarcoat things a little bit. There's a bit of redemption, but it's not like a total rewrite or like Walk the Line, for example, which for me, the Johnny Cash biopic with Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon, as effective as their performances were, it really did completely rewrite the sensibility of Johnny Cash, where they reduced him to just a little boy in love with a country girl and wanting to win. When you're talking about a major artist here with a vast abyss of darkness that swept over him. And the movie ends with a happy ending of them proposing to her on a stage. This is the convention of the Hollywood biopic in a sense. But there are also other biopics about bands that are good. And I wondered if you'd ever seen the Joy Division one, Control, by Anton Corbijn.
Yes.
Which I think is an incredibly effective rock music bio. Not only because, of course, it's built into the tragedy at the center of Control, which is Ian Curtis commits suicide. The band dissolves. But up until then, just its approach was so kind of minimal and elegant. And the way the music was integrated into it just had this kind of it was very artificial looking, but it also felt within that artificiality to represent the band, to represent the sensibility of the band. And
it felt almost effortless to me, the film. I loved it. It's actually one of my favorite biopics in recent memory.
Yeah. And I was kind of thinking, what else is there that is kind of on the level of Control in terms of a movie that explores music, explores the notion of being in a band, explores the notion. I guess it's difficult to do that. I mean, it's because it's like, to do it really, really accurately, it would probably be incredibly frustrating to watch and kind of agonizing, as in like a group therapy session being filmed.
Yeah. Being in a band is hard. I mean, it's you're in a marriage and there's no sex. So you're in a sexless marriage.
Well, not if you're in Fleetwood Mac, but still.
True. But you have this other wonderful form of intimacy in that you create music together. And making music and making love are actually they're wonderfully similar in certain ways. In energetic ways, they are so similar that I feel like it's probably been talked about ad nauseum over the years. But you're in this energetic exchange with people who you have these silent agreements with this whole time, and for a couple of hours every night, you are doing this with them, and then it has all the same sort of pitfalls of sex in a marriage, and that like it becomes routine, and then now you got to spice it up, and then play a different set. You know what I mean? And then even to do something like want to branch out from that marriage, there's a little part of you that's like, am I like betraying this marriage? So there's a lot of like you have to, once again, sorry to be redundant, but like give yourself permission to be, and I use the term too, like polyamorous. Like be creatively polyamorous as you branch out from that initial marriage. But back to music films. Control, I loved from the minute it started because I felt like every shot looked like a beautiful photograph.
Yes.
There was not one shot in there where I wasn't going like, whoa, this is so beautiful. They could like put the whole film in stills through a room, and I would walk through the room slowly and still admire it.
But also it felt appropriate for the nature of that band.
Yeah, there was no happy ending, and they weren't trying to either.
Right. And just that time of 70s Manchester and the punk movement flowing into the new wave movement. Yeah. It just seemed stylistically apt for that movie.
Music biopics are tough. I'll probably think of a couple.
The real problem is just movies about the rock scene can always tumble into a kind of inauthenticity in a way, or they become overblown or overdramatic. And
there's one that I'm thinking of that Spinal Tap movie always frightened me growing up, being in a band, growing up in a band, and I would see pieces of Spinal Tap and I didn't want to watch it because I knew it was a joke and I knew it was sort of a mockumentary and this whole thing, but it seemed too real. And so I allowed myself to watch it about, 10 or 12 years ago from front to back. And I know it's a comedy and I know it's not real, but it is so real in so many ways to what the goofiness of being in a band and the entitlements and the ego things and all those things. And in a way, it's kind of genius. It's more accurate. It's a more accurate depiction of being in a band than other kind of like more established biopics have been. So
it was kind of embarrassing.
It's a little embarrassing. Yeah. The other part about being in a band that's difficult is that you're an adult that's sort of given license to just hover in this perpetual state of adolescence. And so occasionally as an adult, there's a part of you that's like, will you go get me a sandwich? And you feel kind of ridiculous. But, that's what you see what I'm getting at? Like there's a part of you that desperately wants it to be more sort of legitimate than it is. So you have to take it with a grain of salt, and you can't really take yourself that seriously, which actually, going back to what we originally talked about, could be one of the areas where I've been able to find some modicum of happiness in amongst all of this craziness, is that I've learned not to take any of it that seriously. Because if you pull back just a little bit, and look at it, it is kind of funny. It's a funny job. It's a funny way to like go about your life. It's beautiful. I love it. A lot of the time, it's actually really kind of goofy and embarrassing.
Well, Brandon, thank you for being here on the Bret Easton Ellis podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Bret Easton Ellis Podcast.
Only new Arm & Hammer Clump and Seal cat litter guarantees an odor-free home for 7 days.
My name is Erin. I manage a pet sitting company. I honestly feel like I have the most experience with litter boxes of any person I know. Clump and Seal is totally different. Even after 7 days, I did not notice any odor. You're not getting the dust that comes up. There was some sort of sealing magic happening.
New Arm & Hammer Clump and Seal cat litter. 7-day odor-free home guaranteed. Look on the package for $3 off.
Buy a box, see what you think in 7 days, because it's legit.